Hello, travellers. I'm Jo Frances Penn, and today I'm here with Wendy Nugent. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Joe. It's so nice to get to talk to you guys.
Oh, yeah, I'm excited about this. Just a little introduction. Wendy spent a decade as part of an award winning magic act performing on cruise ships all over the world. She travelled from Alaska to Venezuela, Bermuda to Tahiti, and many exotic ports of call in between. Now, Wendy uses her insider knowledge of cruise ship life to write entertaining, cozy mystery books set on cruise ships. I think you've got one there as well, haven't you? One of your books. Yeah.
Great.
Murder Takes a Bow. Yeah, fantastic. So this is going to be really interesting. To start off, just tell us, how did you come to work on cruise ships in the first place? Why did you want to be part of that kind of life?
So, I have a degree in theater. So, I had a background in entertaining, but I was actually working at Colonial Williamsburg as a costumed tour guide right straight out of college. And I had moved there from upstate New York and was excited to be someplace a little warmer. And I met someone who was working on cruise ships, and they ended up hooking me up with a job working as a youth counselor. So that was my first contract. And it was just a 3 and 4 day cruises, really quick. Well, working, it was the former Disney ship, the Premier Cruises. And I ended up working my way through working up to being part of a review show where I had a section where I would hold up big dance cards and dance around on stage and do silly things like that. And then over the years, I worked into having this magic act with my then partner and traveled the world. And it was really a fun way when I was young and in my 20s and early 30s to you get paid pretty well to live on ships and travel the world. So I have no regrets about it. It was a great experience and I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I'd want to do it now at this point in my life, but when you're young and you don't have any commitments, it's a really fun way to get to see the world.
And why did you stop working
Well, I
on
stopped when
cruise
I was
ships?
5 months pregnant.
Ah, I was going to say there must be family in there.
Yeah, so that last contract was pretty rough because I was dealing with morning sickness and performing and getting bigger and everything. So my last contract ended when I was 5 months pregnant, and I was definitely done at that point. You get burnt out from all of the travel and constantly being on the go and in a different port every day, and it's a lot. So 10 years, it was good, and I really enjoyed it, but I was definitely ready to leave when I was done.
Yeah, well, but it's interesting because, of course, you've written this series of books set on cruise ships. So there's definitely this thing in you
Yeah.
that is still kind of holding on to that life. So let's first start with, what are some of the most amazing things, the highlights that you can remember that you were like, yes, this is the best job in the world?
Oh, they're definitely. I mean, I hiked to a waterfall in Venezuela with all of the entertainers on board. It was like an epic, you got done with this out in the middle of Venezuela and you're thinking like, what life am I living? This is incredible. And when I was in Tahiti, Jean-Jacques Michel Cousteau was there and he was leading tours in Fatu Hiva, which is one of the Marquesan Islands. I mean, you're thinking like, how is this even possible that I'm getting to do this? And Tahiti was definitely a high point, and I was incredibly lucky because I was on the Paul Gauguin, which is a very small cruise line and beautiful ship, very, very higher end cruises where they had a lot of educational talks and things like that that were going on during the talk. And I lucked out because I was only there for a few weeks, but over that time the run that I was on, they were going up and they did a special run up into the Marquesas, which are really remote islands that you wouldn't get to. It would be very difficult if you weren't on a ship to be able to go to all of these different islands and get to see these places. So Hiva Oa and Fatu Hiva and all these places that are amazing. And because you're part of a ship, they're bringing on dance groups and cultural events and things like that. So it was an incredible experience.
So those things just sound amazing. You did mention there a small cruise boat, and I'm really interested in this. So I have never been on a cruise. I have been on a tall ship, like a passenger on a tall ship, but not like a cruise. So when you say a small cruise ship, what sizes are we talking
I
here?
think that this had about 300 passengers. So when you
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've been on cruise ships that had 1,500 passengers up to 3,000. So when we would do a performance, we might have 12 or 1,500 people in the audience at a time. So there's some pretty large ships. So the smaller ships are pretty unique and there are not very many of them. And they tend to be more
Mm.
expensive because they're going into very unique ports and things like that. But they were definitely, when I got to do those, were always my favorite for sure.
Yeah. And then again, you said the high points there sounded like they were on the shore leave
Oh, for sure.
instead of
Yeah.
on the boat. So were there any moments when you were out on the ships kind of that you were like, this is amazing? Or did you just never have the time to kind of stand at the bow doing the Titanic thing?
No, definitely did that. Because I was on ships during that time period when Titanic was the thing. So it was really fun. And I think the most fun part of being working on a cruise ship is that everybody there. So I was really lucky because I was working as an entertainer. And when you're doing that, you just do your shows. I didn't have to do any crew duties. I was on the passenger manifest. So it's a pretty good life compared to you have a decent cabin, you have your own private cabin, you're not stacked in bunk beds like the crew might be. It's a very almost a military kind of background of the way that ships work. They're very much a hierarchy from you have your crew members that live down in the below decks and they're having to wear uniforms all the time. They're very restricted in what they can do during the day and they work a lot of hours. And then above crew, you have staff members and the staff members are more the ones that are doing the running the games and that when I was working as a youth counselor I was on his staff and so you have more privileges but you're still like a uniform wearing person that lives in a crew area and then when you're an entertainer and I guess the officers the officers rule everyone passengers and crew and then as an entertainer there aren't very many of you on board even if you have yeah, a cast usually will be a few people that are singers and dancers that perform, and then there'll be a few entertainers like I was, where you have your own act and you're traveling ship to ship to ship doing your performance. And when you're doing
Mm.
that, you generally are on as a passenger. You're on that passenger manifest. So other than performing, I got to read all the time. I got to sit out on the deck in Alaska and watch the eagles fly by and watch the otters drift past the ship. So it was a pretty good gig
For the time.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So yeah, I got to do some fun things and but the best part of that is that you meet people from all over the world and you have friends because you're away from your family, you're away from all your friends, and you're only there maybe for 2 months or 6 months. So you bond really quickly because you don't have anybody else and you're there for Christmas and you're there for your birthday and you get kind of relationships that you might not ever have in day-to-day life working just a normal job. So that's the
Mm.
most fun. Like my favorite memories are sitting out on the back deck and you're getting to hang out with the comedians and all of these really funny, entertaining people that are super interesting. And generally the people that work on cruise ships tend to be kind of unique because it's not a normal thing to do. So they tend to be really fun and funny. The people are what make it so much fun.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, you're a writer now, and I'm obviously a writer, and I'm an introvert, and the thought of all those people is way too much. Now, as a writer, you do spend time alone. So, are you
Oh,
an extrovert, or how did you deal with all that?
no, I'm definitely an introvert. And that was the most challenging part because if I left my cabin after I'd had my show, everyone recognized me. And it would
Mm.
get exhausting. You would get the same jokes over and over again. Because I was doing a magic show, I had people come up and literally a man lift my shirt up to see where I got cut in half. I mean, the boundary crossing was kind of crazy. So it would get exhausting. The good thing is you would do a contract and then you'd go home for a few months and you could rest. The other thing is that when you were on the ship, you had your cabin, you could kind of find little places, or you would come out in the evenings when everybody else was doing something else, or when you get into port, you would go off because you didn't need to do the touristy things after the first week. You could go
Mm.
find little place where no one was and kind of build your own little private world within that. And I always looked forward to if my show was at the end of the cruise because then I would have just kind of quiet the whole time because it did wear me out. It definitely did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, let's talk about some of the challenges. I mean, I guess there you mentioned that some of you said you had a decent cabin. So that implies that some of them were pretty bad. What are some of the biggest challenges of that cruise life?
Well, it's definitely the fact that you are away from everybody and you can be away from your family for every holiday. My grandma passed away a couple years ago and I got all of her pictures and I'm going through organizing all of her pictures and I'm like all these family events and I'm not in any of them because I wasn't there for anything. So that's kind of challenging that you're missing out on, when someone had a baby or Christmas and people's birthdays, and you miss all that kind of stuff. So that makes it difficult. My husband's always laughing at me because if it happened in the 90s, I'm like, I didn't watch the TV show. I didn't,
You weren't there.
I'm like, yeah, it's like all brand new to me because I just missed like a decade. We didn't even have, back then, I didn't have a cell phone. I
No.
didn't have any.
No internet.
Yeah, like if I had to send an email, I would find like an internet cafe someplace and go send an email. But it was very like I used payphones and quarters to be able to call people or a card. So you didn't have the same kind of ease that you would do it now, where you could just FaceTime your family and be a part of things. So that was definitely difficult, and that was hard for
Hmm.
me because I'm close to my family, and so I had a hard time with that part. But at the same time, I'm glad I did it when I was young and I hiked in Alaska. I got to go up through Perseverance Trail. And I also saw people that were on ships that were finally able to afford to go on these incredible cruises. And they weren't able to do those things because their knees were bothering them or they were on oxygen or something. So I just tried to always be grateful that I was able to do this while I was young and healthy and see the world
Hmm.
and get paid to do.
Yeah, but then I guess a lot of people listening are not going to work as
No.
entertainers on the cruise ship. So let's just, I mean, I have thought about it, but like I mentioned, the introvert thing, but I also have this sense of it being really constrained where I would, if I, say it's really bad weather and you're stuck in your cabin, whether or not you're feeling sick or whatever, but the thought of not being able to get off and just walk away is something that sort of brings up not fear, but a sort of, I don't necessarily want to do that. So what would you say to people who have those feelings around cruise
So my
ships?
husband kind of was like that when we met. He was like, "Oh boy, I bet I'm going to get stuck going on a cruise someday, aren't I?" And he did. I took a group of my readers in January and he came along and we had a great time. We had a balcony cabin, which I think helped because we could sit outside and just watch Cuba go by and things like that. And it was fun and he had a better time than he expected. I don't know if it would be like his number one way of traveling again, but he did enjoy it. And I think that there are certain itineraries that would just be very difficult to do if you were just trying to like Alaska, for example. There are all these little tiny islands on the Inside Passage. It is possible to book ferries and maneuver your way up through there, but it's definitely more challenging to do something like that. Tahiti, the same thing. You've got all of these little islands. And so, it's an 8-hour flight from the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. So it was like a 30-hour flight for me to get there. You
Mm.
could figure out ways to go to all of those different islands, but it would be expensive. It would be exhausting to try to navigate all of the travel arrangements and things like that. So it's just certain destinations I think make sense. Some people just love to cruise. Two of my best friends, like that's their way they travel. If they go someplace, they go on a cruise. And that's great. But if you just love it, like going to the Caribbean or going to the Mediterranean is super fun because you just like the experience of being on the ship is part of it for those people. They want to go to bingo. They want to go on the biggest ship that has some kind of a water slide and things like that. But you can also find some really interesting itineraries that would maybe go someplace that like if you wanted to travel in Asia, that is an interesting place to go, but it can be very difficult to maneuver your visas and not being able to read the signs and things. And so you could kind of get a taste of it by going on a cruise. They go all over the place. It's not just like the big, beach destination. So it depends. I did like a
Mm.
Canada New England cruise that was spectacular. And I got to started in Boston and it went up into Bar Harbor, Maine. And I got to go to Prince Edward Island and see the Anne of Green Gables house. And I went to Quebec City and I went to Montreal. And that was really cool. And while you could do that, you can't drive to all those places. So you'd have to do driving and ferries and cross borders. And it just makes it super simple. You unpack once, you wake up in the morning, you get off the ship in whatever destination you're in, and then you move on to the next place.
Hmm. Well, I was thinking about that because I did this tall ship journey from Fiji to Vanuatu. And as you said, Fiji is islands, Vanuatu is lots of islands.
Yeah.
And so we were stopping at different islands. But it's funny because I don't think of that as a cruise. I was on watch, you know, I was still a passenger, but I was on watch duty. And there were only, must have been 20 people maybe.
Oh.
So what would be the difference between like a tall ship and a cruise? Like, is there a point at which a journey on a ship becomes a cruise?
So I know there are like river cruises and things that are small. My parents are actually going on a cruise in July up. They're doing a New England cruise and it's just got a couple hundred passengers. But I think that that's kind of the difference. When you start to have 100, 200 people, it's going to be more
Okay.
cruise. And I think one of the benefits would be if you have seasick issues, a larger ship, they just don't move around the same way. Like you may feel the movement, but it's not going to knock you around quite the same way as a smaller one. The smaller the ship
Mm.
is, the more you're going to start to feel. And I think the modern, especially the modern ships, they've got all sorts of things to try to keep people. So it almost feels like you're just in a hotel walking down the hallway. So I've been on some small ones where you walk down the hallway and you like hit, as you were going down because, you were just getting rocked back and forth on a, like especially like the Bermuda crossing the Atlantic to Bermuda. That one, I would wake up in the morning and my back would hurt and my neck would hurt from like holding onto the bed all night because bouncing us around. So that wasn't like my favorite run, but it was kind of fun because once we got to Bermuda, we'd be there for 3 or 4 days, which usually you'd be there for a few hours to a port.
Ah,
So I enjoyed that
yeah.
because you could just really enjoy the port.
Yeah, so I think you're right about thinking about the itinerary perhaps before, I guess the itinerary and a budget before picking a boat or something, because then you can really think about that aspect of it. I think I would do a smaller one. Like we did some walking in Norway, and of course Norway is the same, just lots and lots of fjords, and so I did actually look into that. Well, you've encouraged me, but I did want to ask you because of course you write these cruise ship mysteries, so you must have also been inspired by some weird and unusual things. So I mean, you mentioned that the sort of military hierarchy that must come into it somehow, but what are some of the other things you've woven in that are weird about it?
So I was on a cruise ship that they were parking the boat at the dock and they didn't do a very good job and they rammed into the dock and it hit so hard that it literally crushed the side of the boat. Like you could have put a Volkswagen bus in the side of this dent on the side of the boat. I was on board a shipboard fire on a Cunard ship once. I was in Montreal on that Canada New England cruise I was telling you about, and we had a wave of flu that came through the ship, and they ended up quarantining us, and we were quarantined for a week. It made national news. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting things that have happened. And when you're on, I was on I don't know, probably 8 or 10 different cruise lines over the years. So there's always going to be something that happens. I was there during when the Cuban refugee crisis was happening on one ship, and we picked up Cuban refugees that were trapped. They were floating on just like this raft that you're not quite sure how it's holding them up, and they didn't have any water and they didn't have any food, and everybody's at like a sail away party and they're all dancing and music, and then you look down and you see that kind of human tragedy, and waited with them until the Coast Guard came and picked them up. So there's some incredible things that have happened, and yeah, many of them make their way. It's kind of like, okay, when I was in Tahiti, I had an accident on stage and I fell and got a concussion. And that makes its way into one of the stories where the sleuth has a concussion. And then how is she going to navigate being on board and having this? Because while you have a doctor on the ship, it's not the same as what it would happen if you were having that here, where they would rush you to the emergency room and do all sorts of tests. So it's definitely a different experience. I've seen people get airlifted off with a helicopter that they had some kind of a medical event. So those kinds of things that you see happen, and that's definitely the start of a story right there. When I was back on ships, I had the idea for the series, but publishing was different back then, and off on a ship, I didn't even have access to anything to even know how, what to do or anything. So I waited until my kids were a little older, and then the world had changed and the way publishing had worked had changed, and it was much more attainable to be able to get the information on how to do all that.
Mm. Yeah, well, the one show I do watch is Doctor Odyssey on Disney. Have you seen that show?
No, I haven't. I actually took my TV out to put my bookshelf up, so I haven't watched any TV shows.
Well, so I don't normally watch cruise ship stuff, but you mentioned the Doctor there, and the Doctor of the Odyssey, and it's about the medical team. I like medical
Yeah.
dramas, and this is kind of medical dramas on a cruise ship. And so, but it's so funny because, of course, bigger drama than concussion, like someone needs some kind of surgery in a storm
Yeah.
and things like this. And
Well, and a lot of people that go on cruises are older, and so,
mm,
more apt to have medical issues, or they're doing something that they, younger people that wouldn't do at home, like they're on a jet ski or something, and they end up hurting themselves, and they've got to come back to the ship, and they've got a broken leg or a broken arm or something. So it happens. They've got a pretty incredible setup.
mm.
And, Olivia, my character, she ends up down there all the time because she's always petting something she shouldn't pet or doing something she shouldn't do, and ends up in some kind of a jam where she needs her doctor to help her.
Yeah, well, one of my many obsessions is this idea of home. And I wondered, like you mentioned there's all these contracts, and then you're moving from boat to boat. And so you arrive on a new cruise ship and you're like, okay, I'm here for, let's say you said 2 to 6 months. How do you make it into somewhere that you can bear to live for that amount of time? Like, how do you make a little sense of home in that place?
So one of the things that I was really lucky because I had a magic show is that I ended up getting pets that could come with me. So I was really unique compared to other people. So Olivia in my book, she has a parrot that is part of her show, and he is based on a parrot that I had that would do the act with me. So that having him with me, that just made traveling. Now it made the travel much more difficult. Having
Yeah.
permits to get in and out of countries, you have to have a vet that you have inspect before you leave, and then a vet that inspects when you come back, that has to come to the ship before you can get the bird off the ship. Half the
Mm.
time they wouldn't even know what type of bird it was, and you're paying them $500 to come to the ship on a Sunday morning. But always having a pet, because I'm an animal lover. I have a cat, Abraham Lincoln, that is my buddy. So I really, that to me, not having a pet was difficult. So those first couple of contracts before I did that, having him, that made a world of difference, and being able to travel with him made it much more like home. But it's still, you've got your little cramped cabin. I mean, because every cabin is small, unless you're going on in a suite. You're not, and that's not, if you work on a ship, you're not going to have that. So you take some of the things that make it feel like home for you, but you can't have candles, you can't cook in your room, you can't, there's many things that, would make it easier. So you
Mm.
spend a lot of time eating at the buffet, and it just kind of is what it is. But that was the hard part for me. Now, the good part is get done with a 6 month contract, and I would have 2 or 3 months where I wouldn't work, and I would just be able to be home. So kind of
Mm.
in bigger doses.
Yeah. So are there other animals on cruise ships? So you think of the ship's cat, for example. Are there animals, or
So,
is it usually animal free?
Captain Kate, she used to work as a captain on Celebrity, and she traveled with her Sphinx cat, who recently passed away. But it's pretty unusual if it's not, usually it's an entertainer. If there's an animal on board, you can bring a service animal on board if you have a service dog, and they
Mm.
have like a grassed area for them to be able to go potty and things like that. But that's really, it's very unusual to be able to have an animal. And if no entertainers have one, there wouldn't be any on board.
Ah, okay. Then that is really interesting. I guess people get to see animals and birds when they're traveling. So,
When I would go to St. Thomas, there were parrots that I would visit there. I went to see monkeys. I had, like, everywhere I went, that was kind of my favorite thing to do. Like, go to Mexico. I knew that if I went to Shell I could go see the monkey. So spend the day visiting with monkeys. So
Yeah. Well, and I guess, like you mentioned, the itinerary, some of those, like the Galapagos, for example, people go on it to see the creatures and
Yeah.
things. And I guess there's scuba diving. I guess I've been on some bigger scuba diving liverboards where there are more people and stuff like that. But yeah, I
Well,
guess
the one
it's interesting to sort of just switch it around in your head, really.
the Palco Gana Tahiti, you could literally go snorkeling or scuba diving right off the back of the ship. The back of the ship came down like a garage door kind of thing, and you could turn
Mm.
into a dock and you could go right off the ship. And then yeah, you'd be there and there'd be incredible fish and dolphins swimming right by you. I remember being out in Alaska and standing watching as we were pulling into Juneau and this huge whale just breached. And you think how huge those ships are. I mean, they're like a floating hotel. You have 3,000 people, but then there's 1,500 crew to keep that whole thing running. And the whale
Mm.
breaches and the entire ship just rocks from the whale. And I mean, like, yeah, that's so cool.
It is very cool. No, I've definitely learned this from our chat is that decide what you want to see and do and then find a cruise that matches
Yeah.
that. Because I mean, my husband knows someone who likes heavy metal music and there's a tour, like a cruise ship that is for metalheads. And I'm like, I can't think of anything worse really than a cruise ship full of like like heavy metal music all the time.
I worked on a cruise once where they had a nudist cruise that had chartered
Okay.
our ship, and they're like, "You have the option if you would like," and we're like, "No, thank you," but yeah, no, thank you. I think I'm gonna be in my cabin a lot this cruise, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, and that's what this Dr. Odyssey does too on the show. Every week is a different theme.
Yeah.
So like they might have gambling week and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's really and there's people listening like, why don't you know about this? I'm like, it's just something I haven't done. But the other thing that's interesting to me is you mentioned that it's like this floating city and there's crew, you've said at one point in your pitch to me, with crew members from 60 plus nations.
What?
And so when you think about that, all these different cultures, obviously people different religions, there's political stuff going on that presumably makes people kind of hate each other in some way, and then they have to do this kind of service culture.
Right.
So how does the culture of the cruise ship work when people come from so many places, or is it just like it is cruise ship culture where you don't do all the other
I
stuff?
definitely think that that is part of it, is that when you're on the ship, there are just expectations that you're going to be kind to everyone. You're going to be in service to everyone, whether they're crew, staff. That's, you want to make everybody's experience pleasant because you are living in this tiny little place together. But there
Mm,
are like a lot of times the officers, they will all be like all Greek or all Turkish or all British. And so I think that some of that is because the cultures are very different. A lot of the officers have military backgrounds and
mm.
they're very strict, very regimented in the way things are. It's not always, not everyone that comes up has been in the military, but it is pretty common, especially for the navigation officers and the ones that's how they've learned how to drive these huge ships and things like that.
Yeah.
But like you would be on one ship and it would just literally be everybody there would be Greek, and then you'd go on a different ship and all of the officers would be Turkish, and they don't necessarily go back and forth with.
Get on.
Yes, yeah. But it was, I mean, for me, I loved it. I made friends with, there was a girl that worked in the casino that was from the Ukraine, and I got to learn about what her life was like back home and why she was, what it meant to her to be able to come on the ship, the money she was able to make as a croupier that, she was able to send back to her family. She was able to use that money to be able to build a better life for herself. A lot of the people, they have young children and their parents might be raising their children while they're on a contract, and their contracts can be long. They can be 9 months or a year, and they may do two or three of those, but when they're done, they're able to buy a home or they're able to do things in their country because the money, while it may not be like for us working as a cabin steward, may not, you'd be like, I can't believe the hours they're working for how much money they're making. But for Indonesia or for a country like that, that money can go a lot further when they take it back home. So there's some definite benefits depending on where you are. For the entertainers, it's one of the best paying gigs that you can get without doing something like a casino in Vegas or Atlantic City or something like that.
Yeah, and as you say, if it's like, and obviously all those officers, they have to get their experience and maybe they've been in the navies or whatever, but then that also helps because I guess the discipline of the crew and the staff has to be, well, this is the ship. It's not your country.
No,
It's not your religion over here or whatever. It's like this is our ship and we all have to play the game, I guess, for a certain period and then you can leave.
right. And they're really good about like making like they would have in the crew mess there would be Indonesian food and Filipino food and so that they have some of that at least a few times a week where it would feel like home to them where they would have things that they could bring because the different crew members work in all the different departments. So I think everybody's in the same boat, literally and figuratively. So everybody wants to make that home for everybody else too.
Mm.
So yeah, there's definitely
Yeah,
culture more than like
yeah.
everyone brings their own history and their own interests and things like that when they come. But I think everybody kind of comes together and then you're a celebrity or you're a princess and that's kind of your identity that you're very proud of the ship that you're working on.
Oh, wait. When you said you're a celebrity or you're a princess, that's the cruise line.
Sorry, yes, the cruise line. Yes.
It's not like I can pretend to be a princess.
I mean, you could. That's the other thing. If you go on a cruise, you're never going to see anybody again. So you can be whoever you want to be.
I don't know. Don't people love it so much? And they're like, oh, I'll see you this time next year.
Definitely. I mean, the people who love cruising, they love
Mm.
cruise and they'll find the cruise line that like fits them because there's different, each cruise line will have a different clientele that kind of navigates to them with age and, how much it costs to do that or the types of itineraries they go to. And so, yeah, there are people who are like, they're part of the celebrity club. They go on just celebrity ships and they've been on 27 cruises over the years. And then there are people who, they've gone on one and they're like, that's just not for me. It depends on
Yeah.
what you're interested in. Like I'm not a gambler. I, go into the bars and things like that wasn't that interesting for me. So I enjoyed it working on it. It's not necessarily the way I would travel all the time for vacations.
Well, maybe some people listening can leave us some comments about their favourite cruise lines. I'm certainly interested. Okay, so this is the Books and Travel podcast. So, apart from your own books, obviously, what are a few books that you would recommend around this topic?
So if you're looking to like pick itineraries, Lonely Planet has some wonderful books that are like a Caribbean itinerary or going to Alaska that you can kind of get some information about what those ports are and it'll help you to pick. I definitely would like to go to Ketchikan and so I want to look for one that has that because our Sitka or whatever your interest is. So for just guides, those are interesting ones and they tend to be kind of surface level for the different ports because you're usually only there for a day, but it can kind of give you an idea of like, I'm only going to be in Juneau for 6 hours. What should I do while I'm there? So they're kind of interesting. As far as fiction, if you're a mystery lover like I am, Mary and Carol Higgins Clark wrote a very light, very fluffy mystery called The Santa Cruise that's very silly. And it's like after Christmas and all of these Santas are on this ship. It's goofy and silly, but if you're just looking for something light and fun, that is a fun one. And then what I read a lot when I was working on ships is not necessarily cruise related, but I love James Michener. And he had
Me
a
too.
lot of books that, like, if you want to know about the formations of the shells in French Polynesia, like, he is your guy. And so I would feel like I really knew the places from his book. And when I got there, I had the history of it. I had so much information from his books. I just think they're amazing. And I had plenty of time on ships to read one of his, very,
Doorstops.
yeah, exactly.
Yes, serious doorstop books, James Michener. I'm thinking, and actually, when you go on a cruise, I guess if you take a physical book, I mean, a lot of people now read on their phone or
Yeah.
a device, a Kobo,
Back
Kindle,
then,
whatever.
there were no ebooks. So yeah, the ships usually have a library. So you can
Mm.
usually get some books on ships. They sometimes will sell some in the gift shop. And then for me, I would go into port and I would just load up books. And then the next week I would take them off and get the next round of books when I would hit the States and could go to a bookstore. But yeah, I read a
Yeah,
lot.
that's so funny. You reminded me then when I was backpacking as well in the late 90s and 2000, and you'd carry a book to the next place and then you'd take it to like a book swap,
Yep.
and you basically it was whatever was there. I remember reading in Australia that in the outback there was this one book about giant spiders invading like a site, and I was like, I shouldn't be reading this in Australia.
Like every library everywhere, if they had like a book exchange or a, because I couldn't get a library card because I'd only be there for a few weeks, but usually they would have like a little book sale at the front or something like that, and I would bring my books and donate, and then I would buy my next stack of books. So yeah.
That is awesome. Okay, so where can people find you and your books online?
So my books are available wide. They're available in all the major bookstores. You can get them on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Kobo, wherever you read books. I also have a website, wendynugentbooks.com, and it's Neugent books.com. So wendynugentbooks.com is where all of my books are. If you want to come and see me there, I've got pictures from back when I worked on ships, and I've got a free travel guide for cruises. If you're interested in getting some more information about like packing and those kinds of things, you can get that there.
Brilliant. And show us the book one more time.
So down backward. There you go. So murder takes.
Murder Takes a Bow. Looks great. If you want a cruise ship mystery, there you go. So thanks so much for your time, Wendy. That was
Oh,
great.
thanks, Joe. It was really a pleasure to be here.